Well, this weekend is marking 1 year since a mass shooting at a splash pad in Rochester Hills. Yesterday, we talked to Mayor Bryan Barnett about the resiliency of his community. And now we're going to talk about the fact that despite 9 people being shot, everybody survived. Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard is live with us this morning. Sheriff, thank you so much. You just got an award, which it seems strange to talk about an award in a mass shooting, but I think what that award says is that your people knew exactly what to do and how to do it.
Yes, we hope and pray we never have to face a situation like that. But, in our business, that's not a strategy. Preparation is. So we prepare for the worst and we hope and pray for the best. And unfortunately, that's what happened on that terrible day, was that we had some of the worst kinds of intentions from an evil person go out and do something terrible to a whole bunch of other folks that were just trying to enjoy their day and their lives. And that preparation kicked in. Our people got there super fast. They looked for any kind of threat. The first job, the folks from being in peril anymore or anyone else getting hurt. Once that is concluded, that threat is no longer viable, then we transition immediately to helping and caring for those that may be injured or wounded. And the training on that next level deals specifically with that, how you deal with wound care, traumatic mass casualty wound care. And a lot of those lessons came from combat. So the award is actually named after an individual that was a Navy SEAL and a doctor and had treated wounds, in the combat theater. And that's how so many military men have survived, because one of the biggest enemies of staying alive is bleeding. And so a lot of wound care happened there. One of our sergeants, Sergeant Ashley, actually put multiple tourniquets on himself. So we're very proud of our folks, the training, the response, the wound care, and our partners at Rochester Hills Fire Department, because while the wounds were terrible and it was a situation where many people could have died, no one did. And so we're thankful for that.
You talked about Sergeant Joe Ashley, and in the release about that award, it actually broke down the numbers, saying that there were 5 tourniquets applied to 5 different victims, and Sergeant Ashley placed 4 out of the 5. First of all,
Right.
Huge kudos to him. I didn't even realize, pardon me, that you have that many tourniquets, although I guess in the training you could probably just grab anything, a belt or something to stop the bleeding, right?
You could, depending on how it's applied and, the way to ratchet it down. But we actually have tourniquets that are issued to all of our deputies that are out in the community, and they wear them on their uniform. So it has it right there. The training's there. So if God forbid they're in a situation where they have to use a tourniquet on a victim, they know how and what to do with it. And secondarily, this is very important, that oftentimes officers may get shot themselves and may not have immediate care coming to them, so they have to do wound care for themselves. So we actually teach self-application of these tourniquets.
I remember during the first 24 hours or so after the shooting, you had mentioned that one of the reasons the response from your deputies was so good is that you've got a system in their patrol vehicles that allows them to listen to 911 calls that are coming in, as opposed to waiting for dispatch to send them the information. And you said that one of your sergeants was the first to respond before even being dispatched. Was that Sergeant Ashley?
Yes, it was.
So Sergeant Ashley was able to listen to that call before being sent out. How much time do you think that saved in response time?
Yeah, so going back a little bit historically, anytime there's a mass shooting or a situation anywhere in the world, I and many of my staff study it very deeply and intensely, and including our own very tragic Oxford. We constantly look for what else can we do? What else can we prepare for? How can we get better faster? And I had actually seen some technology even prior to Oxford, but we had not been able to get it purchased and get it fully implemented and do all the things. It was in process, but it was in place when the Rochester tragedy happened. And so Live 911 allows us to geofence an area, and certain people within that area can listen to the actual call coming into dispatch and hear what they're saying. And if they think it's something that they need to respond to immediately, they can self-deploy. That's what happened on that particular day. And also, if you look at the stats from around the country, Live 911 can save between 1.5 and 2.5 minutes of response time to get to a scene. So every second counts in those situations. That's why I sought out that technology, and we now have it in place.
You had mentioned that one of the number one killers is blood loss. That 2 minutes really does make the difference, because in 2 minutes you can bleed out.
100%. Yep. That's why everything we do is focused on how we can do it, again, better, faster, with more efficiency, with more safety, with more wound care, whatever the case may be. How can we increase the probability of stopping someone first and foremost that intends to hurt others, and secondarily take care of people that may have been hurt?
I also remember you and I had a conversation shortly after, the morning after the shooting, and you had mentioned that there were some apparent red flags on the side of the suspect in this. And he did take his own life, so there wasn't a trial. We didn't hear any of that later on. But I don't know if frustration is the right word, but I could sense from you that this is one of those situations where somebody probably could have called either mental health professionals or even your office and maybe could have prevented this. That mental health conversation kind of stopped with this case, but I think it highlights the fact that there's a phrase that says, see something, say something. It's not necessarily cliche, it isn't, but people don't always take that to heart, because that could have prevented this one. Not saying it would have, but could have.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. People in this individual's family had seen and heard him do things that they found very concerning. They knew he had weapons. And, actually, we believe there was a high probability that this wasn't going to be where it was going to stop, because, when we surrounded his house and ultimately entered his house, we found a loaded AR platform rifle there. And he had not used that at the scene of this shooting. He had used 2 handguns. So that was all ready to go. And, we think that because we got there so fast and surrounded the house, that he realized he had nowhere to go, and it ended up with him committing suicide. But there was a good chance he had gone back, was going to get another weapon, since one of the weapons was left at scene, and was going to go back out somewhere. And again, remember, this was completely random. He didn't live in Oakland County and had never been to the splash pad as far as we're aware of. So who knows where he could have gone or what he could have done.
In the cases of random shootings like that, is that what concerns you the most? When you look at mass shootings that we've had, usually there is some connection between the suspect and the victims or the place that the shooting happens. Random ones are so much harder to talk about because you don't know where they're going.
Right, 100%. And that's where, as you said, see something, say something. Again, the family members heard him talking himself, walking around, muttering with weapons. Knew that he was having some very, very serious mental health challenges, and yet never informed authorities. We can take action to kind of intervene in those situations. And if you look at most of the mass shooters that have happened anywhere, including in Oakland County, people saw something that, had they done something with that information, shared it more robustly, had some intervention moments occurred, either by family members or others, there's a good probability many of these could be avoided. In fact, we had a situation, as you know, in Pontiac recently, where someone saw a post where, a graduation potentially might get shot up, which caused our deputies to dig a whole lot deeper when they were on scene there for a fight. And they found 2 loaded weapons with 80 rounds of capacity at that scene outside the graduation. So very probably intervened in a situation that could have been another tragic mass shooting. Especially
in a situation like that graduation, where people are confined to a space and the exit points are much more difficult, as opposed to the splash pad where it was a wide open area, which also brings up another conversation I wanted to have with you, which dives into mental health more, and what just seems to be in our current society, that there are, I don't want to say fist fights are the right way to go, but there seems to be this thing where people are much more apt to just grab a gun to solve their conflicts as opposed to talking it out. I don't know if you have the answer to this, but why is that? And how can we do something about this to get people to stop reaching for guns as their first solution?
Yeah, I agree with you 100% spot on. As you said, kind of in, I guess if you call it the old days, it used to be a situation where if somebody had a dispute, it may end up in fisticuffs behind the school gym or something like that. Not a good, solution of a disagreement, obviously, with any kind of violence, but the kind of violence that goes from fisticuffs to firearms is so much worse. And so we've seen that at a variety of situations. A lot of the fairs and different kind of carnivals around the county have been shut down because they've seen the same kind of thing. A disagreement escalates quickly to a shooting. You saw that at the state fair last year. And so I don't know. I think that's a societal question of how we get in front of that, how we teach resolution of these conflicts in a nonviolent way, and that, being disrespected or somebody saying something to you isn't worth, ruining both of your lives, potentially taking theirs and then sending you to prison for the rest of yours. So that's a societal thing we're going to have to work with. But the important thing is that if you see someone carrying or talking about using a weapon or committing that kind of violence against someone else, you need to share that information so that the authorities can get in front of that. We'd rather investigate 100 nothings than miss one real deal.
Mm-hmm. What do you think we need to do as a society in communities to make it more normal, make it the norm that when we do see something, we say something, we have these mental health conversations? Because no matter what we do, no matter how long you and I will talk about this live, it's always a stigma. People never bring it up when it's most important.
We know people are very challenged, with all sorts of mental health challenges these days, especially after COVID. We've seen a huge spike. I saw statistics on our jail population. About 60+% are under some kind of treatment for some kind of mental health challenge. So, the numbers have gone through the roof, and we're seeing that in the real world on calls on a daily basis. That's why we now have, co-responders that go with our deputies to situations that people are having a mental health crisis and try to calm that situation down and get them into treatment, do things like that. But I think it was 2 days ago, we had 3 suicides in one day in one of our communities. I mean, that's a staggering number. And I keep posting, if you need help, it's strength to ask for it, not a weakness.
Right.
But, we're seeing it all across society, including in law enforcement. The largest cause of death in law enforcement in America isn't all these ambushes and shootings, which we've had tragically against officers. It's actually suicides.
Before I let you go, Sheriff, I do want to talk to you about one more thing. Your office released some information about a week or so ago talking about the crime stats in Pontiac. You took over jurisdiction of Pontiac about 14 years ago now. And then in 2011, it was ranked the 6th most violent city in the entire country. And since then, the crime stats have dropped dramatically. In fact, I'm looking at the numbers here. 2021, 15 homicides, 48 armed robberies. Again, not saying that any number is good, but how did you get those numbers to drop so significantly?
Well, we have a very effective model, and part of it, again, as we talked about, goes to a fast response and to not overlooking even minor calls, because oftentimes they turn into a major event. I mean, if you look at McVeigh from the Oklahoma bombing, he was caught on a traffic stop. So you have to be out, engaged in the community, doing active, preventive, and patrolling police work, and work with your community so they feel comfortable to call. They know you're going to respond. They know you're going to look to try to do everything you can to keep them safe. And that partnership brings benefits and gets inclusion in those kinds of calls that get you to those scenes quicker. And then you have to have consequences for those that commit those crimes. And our solving rate of homicides, I would put up against any agency in the country. The last I saw, we were in the 90 percentile, with many communities in the country are in the 30s. So, we try to do everything we can to catch the people and then hold them accountable. Because the other thing that we've seen in a lot of studies is a very small number of people do a very large number of the crimes, especially violent crimes. And if you catch them and try to catch them early and get them off the street, while you may not have prevented that one tragic crime, a homicide or whatever it is, you probably prevented a string of them from following on.
We're almost out of time. I do want to ask you one more question, though. In that release about the Pontiac, there was a mention about drone policing. What is that? How does that work?
Yeah, so we have inculcated drone into all of our operations. We use it for mapping and crime scene kinds of things. We use it for overwatch to help watch and protect community events to see if anything's approaching that could be endangering them or could be a problem, whether it's vehicles or other kinds of things. You know, with all the different things you see going around the world, we want to be aware of what's approaching people that may be at a fair or carnival or even a protest. We want to make sure they're protected and we have that kind of ability to see what's going on that may threaten that situation. We use it for DFR, drones as first responders. We were one of the first in the nation to adopt that quite some time ago, and now we actually are the first in the nation to get another kind of component, and that is beyond visual line of sight with using technology and not human observation. So that's a huge step forward. I think drones are going to be the equivalent of a radio to police work. You know, you're going to ask in 10 years, how did you do everything you do without those drones? And it's going to be hard to answer it. It allows us to get situational observation to a 911 call much faster typically than you could get a car there. And again, that's faster kinds of response and gives us information. So we've actually caught a homicide suspect fleeing a scene using a drone. We've actually caught and viewed cars fleeing crime scenes and notified our patrol deputies what they're looking for as they respond to the scene. So it gives us a much quicker look into a situation and then sometimes allows us to de-escalate a situation. We actually responded to a call about a person in crisis potentially holding a firearm. And we had the drone overhead and examined what he was doing, what he was up to as the deputies were responding. They saw he did not have a firearm in his hand. So they approached him in a much more calming demeanor rather than having weapons potentially at hand, and were able to get him into treatment.
Wow. Sheriff, thank you so much for your time this morning. A lot of great insight into the things happening there in Oakland County. And the awards that you're winning, again, are congrats to you and Sergeant Ashley. Thank you so much.